Okay. All right. Good evening, good afternoon, and good day, everyone, and early morning to those who are joining us from West Coast now. I was planning to do this at 7 a.m. in the hour, but then I remembered somebody needs a little bit more time. Some people need more time to sleep, which is rare these days. But glad to have this great panel for the discussion today. We have had built up to this great momentum. Yesterday was 8 hours of nonstop real critical thinking and doing, and action packed hours of inspiration. We had a very good view of now around the world. In fact, we visited Israel, UK, Australia to close the day with about the cyber activities that are going on there. And now we started the day today with our friends from India, with a great amount of. I've got my pages full of notes that I have to go and make happen. And with all of your support, I am sure we'll do this. But most importantly, cyber peace. And some of my friends already know the way we started was Cyber Peace Alliance, a very loosely coupled, not tied organization that led to the Cyber Future Foundation we know today. Again, we are very young entrants in this space. This is our 5th year. We're celebrating 5 years. If you add Cyber Peace Alliance, it will be 6. And this is why it's such an important topic. We had a pretty good debate offline. In fact, whether to lead with cyber war or cyber peace or put them together. I'm like, if you want to solve the war problem, we can start with war. But I think we want to make peace, and that is why we are all here together. I think in this time of very divisive geopolitics and national politics and all that, the one thing that will probably all tie us together is our collective aspiration for peace. Our definitions for that may be different, but our aspiration remains the same, that we all have a very peaceful world. And now that world involves very much a lot of cyber. I don't think we could have had any more dynamic, charismatic moderator as Scott is. We have had a great start of this discussion already earlier when we were on the panel together. And of course, with Rod, with you in Davos earlier this year, seems like a different time and different world.
Oh,
And
man, no kidding.
we have been going back and forth on this topic, both of how to make this peace concept mainstream. And you have put your entire life and career at stake to make this happen. So glad to have you all and be joined by Dr. Durga Prasad Dubey, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at Reliance Industries Limited, and also a great supporter and partner, a great long career with the Reserve Bank of India and the Central Bank. So a great amount of knowledge coming together. Let's take it to the floor. Scott, it's your show.
Thank you so much, Val. It's such a pleasure. It's an honor to join all of you today. Thank you so much again for putting all this together. It's a fantastic opportunity to delve into these topics. I think we can solve both cyber war and peace in the hour. But this is an all-star lineup. I'm not worried. I'm Scott Shackelford. For those who don't know me, I'm the cybersecurity program chair at Indiana University Bloomington, the executive director of the Ostrom Workshop, and I'm still just a regular old professor as well here at IU. I got interested in cyber peace during a visiting gig at Notre Dame back in 2013. And I was actually writing a book on cyber war at the time. But I came across this positive peace literature, which got me thinking about flipping the paradigm. In other words, what's the best we can hope for in terms of peace on the internet? And how can we get there? Not maybe a negative cyber peace, which we can talk about, the end of cyber attacks, but building a more positive and maybe lasting foundation. So those are the fun topics that we get to delve into today together. So to help us set the stage a little bit, I thought we could turn to Rod first for some opening comments along these lines. And then Chris as well, feel free to fill in if you would like to. But we'll turn to Rod before we get into our first panel discussion here. And Rod, for those who don't know, I think everybody does, is former CEO of ICANN and director of U.S. National Cybersecurity Center at Silicon Valley, IPO CEO, authors of Serving Peace, and as you can tell, an all-star. So thank you so much, Rod, and welcome any opening remarks you might have on the topic.
Thank you, Scott, and all. It's a thrill to be here, and my life is dedicated to serving peace, so I'm thrilled when you and Val put this topic on the agenda. And that really started for me was on 11th of September in 2001. I was in New York City, and I watched the towers burn. with friends inside. I had 15 clients from my current business. It was a financial software company. The largest concentration of my clients in the world were in those towers. So as they burned, I was trying to figure out who is going to live and who is likely to die, which was a horrible experience. And I've never felt more helpless in my life. I wanted to go and help, and I realized I couldn't even get there if I wanted to because I knew everything would get shut down. And so I took a moment of silence to think about those inside. And very simple words came to me that have guided my life ever since and that are apropos with this conversation. And those words were very simply, it's a small world. It's a fragile world. And no one is safe until everyone is safe. And you are called to serve the peace, which came as a bit of a shock to me. But I literally dropped all my primary business work within 3 months and have dedicated my life to working for peace ever since. Even the jobs I do support peace. ICANN holds the internet, helps hold the internet together. And I did a lot of peace work there with the superpowers of the world, trying to keep the internet unified. And so I was honored to be recruited by the Director of National Intelligence to be one of his senior advisors, and then to run the National Cybersecurity Center, where I got to work closely with Chris and many others. So I want to go back to a conversation I had in the early 2000s. So Bill Creech was a 4-star general, and he wrote one of the best books on total quality management. And the beginning of the book, it says, you got to start any quality effort has to have a positive normative goal. It can't be negative. So I called Bill up and I said, Bill, I'm a high-tech CEO in Silicon Valley, and I'm reading your TQM book and trying to use it in my company. The first one I took public. I said, I'm trying to use your book. And I said, but I have a question for you, sir. And he goes, what's that? I said, General Creech, what is the positive normal goal of the Defense Department? And he said, defense. But I said, Bill, that's not a positive goal. That's a reactive goal. What's the positive goal? And he goes, defense. Well, or protecting resources. I go, well, I don't want to run down that rat hole with you. But I said, I propose, sir, that the positive normative goal of the Department of Defense should be peace. Because peace is the state, the objective that you want to get to through security. Now, you might also say it's peace and human rights and justice and prosperity. But and he was a wonderful man. We had a good discussion. I didn't convince him, but I was absolutely convinced that have been honored to work with the U.S. national security establishment to enhance peace in the world. And so it has an important part of the game. So I want to present a model today. I mean, Val asked me to speak on these topics. So what I'm going to present today, because we are going through, as Val mentioned, a very difficult time in the world. COVID is disrupting the world massively. This is a pandemic. The economy isn't shattered. 500 million people on Earth may be shoved into poverty in the next year or two. The number that are suffering malnutrition will be 300 million by the end of the year, up from 130 million in January. We are in an absolute crisis. And when these crises happen, geopolitical tensions rise, and the possibility of revolutions and war increases. And so whether you look at the possible bankruptcy of countries across the Middle East, like we're seeing the problems in Lebanon already could spread like fire, problems in Africa, growing tension between U.S. and China, these are times when war can occur. So I want to present a simple model that's memorable called the mad, mad, mad cyber world. So here's the model. So if you draw 3 circles and you put them in a triangle, the top mad we have came from the nuclear era, which is to say it's mutual assured destruction. Let me see, I've got to reverse my movements here. It's mutual assured destruction. And why is this relevant to the cyber world? Because every cyber superpower is a nuclear power. And nuclear powers don't want to go to all-out war because it leads to total annihilation. So the game theory that keeps us from going to all-out war is absolutely pertinent to cyber because it creates a boundary condition for our behavior. So that's the traditional nuclear cyber. This down here is cyber mad. That cyber mad is mutual assured disruption. All the superpowers have the capability to completely disrupt another's electrical grids, computer systems, chemical processing plants, trains, self-driving cars. I mean, imagine how you could jam up a city by just having self-driving cars jam up in intersections and block all the traffic. I mean, there's huge implications. But this potential for disruption is absolutely massive. Now, so why don't we do it? Why don't we just completely, why don't the superpowers do that to each other? Well, a few reasons. One of them is this third mad. The third mad is internet mutual assured dependence. We all depend on the internet to keep our economies going, our communications going, this conference going, all of our work. So the geopolitics of the world is in a stasis in cyber, is balanced between these three MADs. These are like boundary conditions, or they're forces, and there's a stasis in the middle. So in the middle, we're kind of moving around in there, and nothing's getting totally out of control. And then within that space, of course, you have intelligence gathering, and that's a very difficult thing to try to govern in international treaties, because intelligence gathering is accepted by all countries. Okay, so how do you, and where do you find the boundary of that? That's an issue. You've got the financial crimes and some state actors doing that. And I predict clearly with COVID happening, we're going to have more problems with that we've got to really address. You'll see the desperation we see in North Korea happening in more countries around the world, using ransomware and other attacks to harm the system. And then the disruption one's really interesting. And I'm going to pick it up quickly, is that the mutual assured disruption is what we're afraid of in the election. So one of the things that happens is some countries want to tamper with other countries' elections. And a great way to do that is social media, maybe even messing with accounting systems, which hasn't happened because that may be a bright red line. But cyber war, one of the ways to think about it is, Clausewitz says that, war is just politics by other means, or policies by other means. War is an expression of a way to react with another country. It's part of your relationship. And it's part of a broken relationship if you're critically hacking each other. So if you look at the different superpowers, they have different models for what they are doing. In the case of elections, we have one primary adversary who seems to engage in that in the cybersecurity space. I would note, and this is a policy recommendation, Val likes concrete action. Policy recommendation, I've said this on CNN, I'm going to say it here. The United States does not presently stand on high moral ground with respect to election tampering. We do not have a policy against it. Until we have a policy against it in the United States of America, how can we condemn others doing it to us? Okay, it doesn't work. And if you go and look at Wikipedia, the history of election tampering, let's just say our country's name is not missing from the list. And I think we can do better than that. Okay, it hasn't been a successful history for us. And I think that we want to get on a higher moral ground, and that's the kind of thing we do want to address in an international treaty or agreement. My last remark is to say, and Chris knows this better than anyone because he's been at the international negotiation tables all over the world. It is tough to get binding cyber agreements and treaties and to enforce them because of the boundary issues, because of attribution problems, and because of enforcement problems. It's really hard. So even though I stand for peace and cyber peace, I'm not a big supporter of the Geneva Convention for cyberspace because I'm concerned that the good guys will have their hands duct taped behind their back and the malefactors can continue with their malicious actions. That's just one view. But this work is really critical. This dialogue today and these excellent resources are critical so that we address, and I think we want to move the ball forward, just like General Creech and I had that conversation. Let's shoot for the objective, which is a better, stable world that we help to lead to, particularly in this time of crisis. Thank you very much, Scott, for letting me make some remarks.
Of course. No, thank you so much, Rod. It's very, very helpful. And now I'd like to introduce the rest of the panelists, and we'll dive right into our 2 rounds, kind of unpacking this concept of cyber peace, both the what is it and how can we actually effectuate it. So as we've said, we're joined by Chris Painter as well, but to properly introduce him, Chris is the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundations, and of course, the former top U.S. cyber diplomat. We're also lucky to be joined by Dr. Durga Prasad Dubey, who is the senior vice president in cybersecurity at Reliance Industries and formerly of the Reserve Bank of India. And of course, Val, everybody knows as well. So thanks for joining us, Val. We really appreciate that. So to the what, gentlemen? So how can we define, the scope of this problem, of this topic? 10 years ago, very little was written about cyber peace. There were some early reports by the ITU, the World Federation of Scientists, the Vatican, that likened cyber peace in part to, a bit pie in the sky, this universal order of cyberspace, built on a wholesale state of tranquility. But even they realized that the definition, couldn't and can't be watertight, but rather is an incremental, list of ingredients that maybe would even include topics like election security, which we can discuss. So that's, the recipe that we're still working on, I feel like, to this day. And there's been a lot of efforts to unpack this over the years since then. We're working on a project right now, an edited volume that I'm co-editing with Chris Ankerston at NYU and Frédéric Duzet from Paris 8. and it's called Cyber Peace: Charting a Path Forward to a Sustainable, Stable, and Secure Cyberspace. It's coming out with Cambridge Press next year. But we toy with the idea of kind of various foundations, 4 main foundations for cyber peace that I wanted to throw out there to kind of get reactions, to get your thinking on this topic. And those core foundations are engineering a system that respects human rights and freedoms, spreads internet access along with cybersecurity best practices, strengthens governance mechanisms by fostering multi-stakeholder collaboration, and promotes stability as well as sustainable development. That's a lot to throw out there, but I would love to hear your thoughts on all these various efforts, that and many others, at defining this concept over the years, how we can move away from this mindset of a negative cyber peace, which, let's all face it, is very, very unlikely, to put it mildly. And just to think through next, how can we get there? But for the time being, let's just work on the definition itself. What does, cyber peace mean to you? And then we'll get to the whole, is it possible, those details, right? So I'm wondering, Chris, can we start with you?
Sure.
And then we'll go to Durga and then Rod?
No, happy to talk about this. And obviously, there are 2 things I'd say from the outset. Obviously, security is part of this. Security is part of peace. I agree with Rod that it's a foundational for peace in the physical world and the cyber world. The idea that cybersecurity is a goal in itself is foolish. Cybersecurity is supposed to enable the economic innovation, the social growth that we all want in the world. And as we become more dependent on these technologies, security becomes even more important. I guess the second observation I make is, even though that's true, and all of us understand cyber, and every probably person in this conference understands cyber, it still, I think, is treated too much as a boutique issue. It's great to have the tribe, as I call it, the gypsy cyber tribe that wanders from conference to conference or meeting to meeting and talks to each other. But a lot of that's preaching to the choir. And the people we need to reach really are in governments, the ministers or the cabinet secretaries, the presidents, the prime ministers, the national security advisors, the generals, the parliamentarians and members of Congress. It's gotten better over the years. For instance, when I started the first diplomatic office that was focused on these issues back in 2011, which is not that long ago, we were the only ones. There are now 40 around the world. That's good.
Yeah.
And the more we think of this as not just a technical issue, and there's technical aspects to be sure, but as a core policy issue, the more progress we can make, just like we do in the physical world, of thinking about how we reach things like peace in cyberspace and how we apply these tools we've used in the physical world. And, I think we've all still seen that a lot of times you mention cyber and people want to run away and think it's a technical issue, and we need to move away from that. I was part of something called the Global Commission for the Stability of Cyberspace. One of your collaborators was also involved in that as a commissioner. And we had a multi-stakeholder group. And there's been a lot of activity over years to try to set what the rules of the road are in cyberspace. There was a sense back even 10, 12 years ago that this was a lawless space, free, a wild, wild west or wild, wild web or whatever you want to call it. There was nothing really that applied, or you needed a whole different set of rules to apply to cyberspace. And I agree with Rod that a treaty, for lots of reasons, doesn't make a lot of sense, especially for human rights reasons. A lot of countries think of threats to cyber as content issues, as destabilizing content, and that's really a difficult issue, or not an issue that I think Western democracies can agree with. But there have been a lot of efforts in the UN and other places to say, what are the rules of the road? Does international law apply? Yes, that's foundational. What are the norms? What are the expectations of state behavior? What are the things that states either shouldn't do, norms of restraint, or should do, norms of cooperation? What are the confidence building measures to try to de-escalate? So there's been a lot of good work, and we can get into that later. But this commission was set up with folks who were in the private sector, former government folks, academics, tech people, a really good group of people. And we defined what we meant by stability in cyberspace. And that definition was stability of cyberspace means everyone can reasonably confident in their ability to use cyberspace safely and securely, where the availability and integrity of services and information provided in and through cyberspace are generally assured, and where change is managed in relative peace, and where tensions are resolved in a non-escalatory manner. And the idea behind that is we're never going to reach, when we talk about stability in the physical world, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be threats. There's always going to be challenges. But if you can manage them peacefully, if you can have the good, promote the good, and promote states working together and trying to de-escalate conflict. That's what we want to do. And there's lots of recommendations we talked about there, proposed norms and other issues. But I think that's really, I think stability. I use cyber stability instead of cyber peace because I think cyber stability is more achievable. It's not easy to achieve, and I'll talk more about this later. But we all see all the threats that we see every day, and I think one of the problems, and especially nation-state threats, and I think one of the problems is, frankly, we have been good at saying what the rules are and even getting countries who are sometimes adversarial to agree to them. We've been terrible at enforcing those rules and having what you can call deterrence or compliance. And if you don't do that, these words are just words on paper, right?
Exactly.
No consequences. Now, you have to make sure those consequences themselves are not escalatory. You're not creating a more fraud environment. But at the same time, I think we need to really work on collective enforcement, getting more countries into the game. Again, there's been some more efforts in that, and I can talk about that later, but I don't want to hog all the time now, and so I'll pass it on to the next speakers.
Fantastic. And we will circle back on several of those topics, because that was very helpful. So thank you so much, Chris. And Durga, would welcome your thoughts as well on, feel free to piggyback on anything that Chris just laid out, or take us in a new direction as well. What does cyber peace, mean to you, and is it indeed possible?
Yeah, thanks specifically, Val, for inviting me to this panel. I instantly agreed for this panel precisely because of the co-panelist. I thought that it would be really privileged from my part to be part of this panel. I have been all through my career is a practitioner where I talk of how to defend and how to implement things. And I was actually talking about cyber war always, not the cyber peace. I thought, I will just tell my experience when for the first time I thought that I should start thinking about cyber peace, not cyber war. I was negotiating with an insurance provider to take cyber insurance for my company. And I thought that I saw that a lot of clauses on exclusion, because I am very, very, very interested in understanding the exclusion from the cyber insurance policy. When I saw this exclusion, there was the act of God, act of war, all these are excluded from the cyber policy. And I thought that the cyber war, the way loosely it is used today for the cyber, anything can be called a cyber war, and I don't get my insurance covered. So that is where I thought that it is better for my part to evangelize that we should not use cyber war. We may use cyber conflict, but we should not use the word war, because if you look at this Joseph Bellum, all the prerequisites, nothing in cyber really comply to those prerequisites. So that's where I thought that we should talk about cyber peace. And that is the time I did my PhD in cybersecurity. So I thought that having done my PhD in cybersecurity, it's time for me to talk something about the peace. So what peace means for me is like, I would rather give a very contrastive definition of cyber peace, which is like peace is defined as a negative way. This can be called, when there is an absence of war, we call it is a peace. So that is the precise definition of cyber peace for me. And if you look at that, how to really achieve cyber peace today in a world where there is hardly any regulations today. If in internet, I spent 2 decades in regulations, and I hardly really felt that the regulation in the internet is not very mature. And when the regulation is not mature, the only thing which can happen is there are a lot of illegal ways of earning money, and there are so many illegal things which will happen, which may disrupt the peace. So there is a need to have peace in this cyber world. And peace for me, there are a couple of points which I thought that I will flag here for further discussion, further deliberation on this. One is this ethical behavior on the internet. I think that this ethical behavior of internet needs to be defined as a global norm, and the respective nation state they should also enact laws and regulations to enforce this. Because unless these respective states they don't enact the regulations, so whatever the global laws and global regulations that would be very difficult to implement.
Mhm.
And what it should contain, if I talk about an ethical behavior on the internet, what it should contain the same kind of norms which are in principle same as the physical world. The physical world, there are laws to maintain peace. To same way, we should try to create some kind of norm to create peace in this cyber world. And Rod was very clearly talking about the attribution problem. Since the attribution is a bigger problem in cyber world and takes time and resources, lot of time and resources to really attribute the threat. So the penalties, the deterrent measures, which is there in the real world, in the cyber world, if you are able to really attribute the threat, the penalties and deterrent measures should be equally harder. And this ethical behavior, which I'm talking, should be part of the educational curriculum of all nation states from a lower school onwards. What I'm thinking is from the beginning, from the school itself, from the middle schools, from the lower school itself, we should nip at the bud and teach these children about the ethical behavior which they should do in the cyber world. And new technologies which is coming should comply to the cyber peace requirement. We may call it a cyber peace index, the way we are calling happiness index, which started by the country Bhutan. We can call something which is called a cyber peace index. And all this technology which is coming to the world, which is a global technology, they should comply to the cyber peace index, and we should be in line with the global norm, which I said about the ethical behavior on the internet. And we should promote the widespread acceptance and implementation of international norms of responsible behavior, as well as the confidence building measures in cyberspace. What is most important is the confidence building measures in the cyberspace. And one thing which is very close to my heart is, like I always talk about, that is like interoperability among various technologies. If there are somehow interoperabilities among various technologies, not the security technologies, but among software, hardware, and also the security systems, that will really make things more transparent. And in a way, I feel that the greatest problem in cyber world, which is attribution, which may become little easier also. And in this today's world, when again I'm back to my blue team cap, where my role is to defend, I feel my defense become always difficult if all these of my control tools or control solutions, I don't know how do they talk to each other. If I have an orchestrated control and they are talking to each other, my defense become very stronger. That is why I think I'm a great fan of interoperability. And if the interoperability happens among all the technologies, they comply to certain globally accepted norms, then things becomes easier and we can achieve the cyber peace, whatever we call it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dirk. That was absolutely wonderful. Sorry about the echo there. And then to turn it over to you, Rod, for some thoughts along these lines as well. I was wondering if I could do so with a bit of a provocation. Okay, so see what you think about this. Right. But I'm wondering, on the one hand, I feel like, and this is just me, using terms like peace can help engage populations that are otherwise kind of turned off, frankly, about these kind of tired discussions of cybersecurity, the way that Chris was discussing earlier. But at the same time, cyber peace is a very, very broad concept, and I'm wondering whether it's so amorphous that it can become unhelpful because we can throw so much into that, to make it, frankly, a goal that's always right over the horizon, right? Depending how we define these kind of first principles. So I'm wondering how you kind of balance that in your own mind.
Sure. Thank you. Great question. And it reminds me a little bit about the book of Gary Heath and his brother called Ideas That Stick. But one of the challenges we have in whatever, policies and frameworks we develop is you want it to stick. If it doesn't stick, it doesn't work. So I want to share a couple thoughts here. I want to go back and try to answer your question first. What's the definition? And there were some good proposals here. And I got kind of 4 different takes on it very quickly. One is I was involved in designing an X Prize once before, and then they asked me that they were thinking about doing a prize for cybersecurity, and they said, "Okay, you're a cyber expert. How would you define cyber peace? If we got $10 million to give to someone or some group that really contributes to cyber peace,
Mm-hmm.
you know, what would it be? And I said, oh, this is really easy. They said, what? I said, all they have to do is stop all hacking on the internet for 1 hour without shutting down the internet. You know, and, you know, that brings back the shutting down the internet story. In 2012, Operation Global Blackout was the only attempt to take down the global internet, and I had to directly run that global response because I was CEO of ICANN. So I have a lot of intimacy with the issue of what could a global outage of the internet look like, and how might it be achieved. But without getting aside from that, now clearly I was being a bit facetious with them, but I was trying to intellectually challenge them to say, this is not an easy definitional problem. Okay. But truly, if there was zero hacking, okay, no money being stolen, no information being stolen, no accounts being broken into for an hour, that would be peace, right? That'd be peaceful. And I don't think we're going to get there. And I'm going to take up your bait by taking an even higher level, which is the history of human violence and war and peace. Right. And all the studies show that back in the Stone Age, 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, it appears that roughly 10 to 15% of human beings in every population in the world were murdered. Homicide or through war or domestic violence, the skulls, studying the skulls and the skeletons, 10 to 15% were murdered. Now, we've gotten down, I think, well below 1% today, but it hasn't been a monotonic decline for 10,000 years. And right now we're going into, I think, a period of high volatility and risk again. The last century, obviously, the spikes were World War I and World War II, where 50 million people were killed. But so in general, we're drifting towards a more peaceful society. And but anyway, actually, I'm off track. I'll come back to that big picture story. But we want to think about that is that peace is not a perfect state. It's a relative state. So I'll come back to these definitions. So the first one was no hacking for 1 hour without shutting down the internet. The second one is to quote a Supreme Court justice who was asked what pornography was, and he says, "I know it when I see it." Okay, I think we know peace when we see it. And it's quite hard to define. I think Chris did a good job, and that, you know, the cyber group did a good job on that, the commission. But we know when we see it. The next thing I want to say is that I like Durga's definition when he said, you know, it's the absence of war. Okay, that's good too. Well, ultimately, peace, I believe, another definition is a state of the heart, and it's a state of the quality of relationships. We know when we have peace in our family. We know when we have war. We know we have peace on our block or our community. We know when we have rife conflict. It's a state of the heart, and that is the driver. And then it has to be supported with processes and things like deterrence and security mechanisms. And so a real simple, clear example we all remember is the Marshall Plan, right? After World War I, reparations, Germany was destroyed again. What did it do? It exploded into Nazi Germany, and we had this horrendous war. You know, and Marshall and others said, hey, we can't do this again. We got to do forgiveness. We got to support the enemy. We got to rebuild the enemy, give them good government, give them capital. That was an act of institutional forgiveness, for goodness sakes. That was an act of the heart, and it worked. So I believe that peace is ultimately an act of the heart, or a state of the heart. We know when we're there, we can feel it. And the question for us is, you know, whether we're the policy wonks or the technicians or the politicians, whoever we are, how do we help move in that direction? And I've had this discussion many times with Vint Cerf, you know, the founder of the internet, one of the two fathers who I work with closely at ICANN, and he helped recruit me there. And that is, you know, the internet was never designed for security or stability. It was designed for openness and flexibility. It aces that. And I want to bring it back to your boss for a second, Durga, Mukesh Ambani, who I know. In fact, Mukesh and I did peace work together because we're both members of Young Presidents Organization. And when I had my touching experience on 9/11 in New York City, one of my reactions was to launch a peace network within Young Presidents Organization. And this is going to get back to your question, Scott, and then I'll wrap on it. I decided to start a peace network within Young Presidents Organization, which was a global network of CEOs. When I was going to do that, the president of YPO said, no, call it national security, Rod. Peace is going to sound too flighty. You're not going to get any CEOs to sign up for this thing. He goes, you'll be lucky if you get 1%. And I told him, I said, David, if I got 1% of 8,000 CEOs engaged in peace work, that's 80 CEOs. I would be thrilled. I said, wait thank you for the encouragement. That's terrific. I stuck to my guns with a peace name. We built a peace network, which grew organically within the Young Presidents Organization. We had 1,300 CEOs register at a separate website to join the informal network within 1 year. 4,000 members, half globally, participated in specific peace-only YPO events within a 2-year period. And part of that, one of the efforts was India, Pakistan, where we started an Indo-Pak forum. And in fact, if you go online and you look on Indo-Pak forum, you'll see there's probably still a website there, but a group of us came together, and Mukesh was very supportive. Mukesh is a YPO member, and I'm not going to say too much about all the individual members in the group. What I'll say is that, for example, in 2003, Mukesh and I and about 30 other CEOs met in Goa for 3 days and had a retreat of all the 8 chapters of YPO together with the Pakistan chapter. It never happened in history. And I'm telling you, the connection of the hearts between the Pakistanis, who of course are from the same people in stock that have been separated, to be accepted by the YPOers from India for a 3-day, it was unbelievable. Trust me, that was a peace love fest, and we all felt it in our heart. But Mukesh was there. It was a great pleasure to meet him, and I hope you'll send him my greetings. Now, what came out of that work? Well, one of the many things that came out of our work together in India, Pakistan, was we decided to do a symbolic border crossing to touch the hearts of people in both countries. So on September, I think 13th of 2003, a small group of our CEOs, about 12, 6 from each country, got together at the Wagah border crossing, came across, met in the middle. And the men and women put flowers around each other's neck. Wagah opened. It had been shut because it was a DMZ. It was a war zone. Wagah had been shut for, I think, 3 or 5 years, at least since 1999. Wagah opened. Our group, our small group of members, and I was asked not to show up because I have blonde hair and blue eyes, so it might raise some questions. So I didn't. I was literally asked, Rod, you helped do this whole thing. Don't show up. I'm like, okay, I won't. It's your show. They opened the gates. They came together. They hugged. They exchanged flowers. The gate's been open ever since. The Indo-Pak War stopped in that instant. And then that was documented subsequently, first with a big speech that Musharraf gave 2 months later in November when he hosted our group, 125 CEOs, in his White House in Pakistan, in Islamabad, and announced the comprehensive 8-point peace plan with India to our group. And so it's an example of what hearts can do. And so I think all of what I want to challenge the world, all of us, is think about what can we do symbolically in the world of cyber to move the hearts and minds to get us towards peace. So that's my response to your good question, Scott.
That's fantastic, right? I feel like we're going to need at least 3 more hours, Val. Can we inform the affiliates we're going to be running long today?
I'll have to reschedule everything.
No, I know, right? My goodness. So Val, I know this is a subject near and dear to your heart as well. So I'm wondering if you wanted to just reflect briefly either off of what Rod was just suggesting in terms of any symbolic actions, and or any of the more concrete proposals that have been made over the last couple of years, including even the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, which lists these various principles around protecting individuals and infrastructure, protecting the internet, election security, norms, of course, a lot of the topics we've been talking about together. Do you think those types of efforts are already bearing fruit, or are we kind of going in the wrong direction with that?
I think directionally, from an effort side, I think we are in the right direction. I personally feel that. I feel less. I feel more concerned about the cyber threat and issues, of course, but I feel less concerned about the issue of cyber peace being so remote that people don't understand. And I'm not a policy wonk. I'm not neither a policy. I'm a practitioner, just probably as Dr. Dubey mentioned, right? That is what got me into this. But even what got me into this even further and deeper, and I've shared this with Chris, you and Rod as well, that I'm thinking about what world is my child going to grow up in, right? It's going to be spending time on Minecraft, spending time on the different, the Discord. By the time I learn something, I try to keep up with him. I cannot, right? They're living their lives there. It's not frontier and backyard. That's probably the least amount of time they spend, unfortunately, but that's what the real world is today. And the work that Chris has done, the awareness that Rod has spread on these topics, on the different avenues of making it happen, I think, are bearing fruit now. And that's why I say I feel very confident, especially the Cyber Paris Peace Call. Now with your involvement and kind of the panels here, also the Cyber Peace Institute, you can see actually work happening, and that's why I feel the difference. And I recently saw I think Eli put out the cyber visuals, right? And that's what actually gets me, right? See, when you close your eyes and think about cybersecurity, you see nothing positive about it, right? Security and peace actually have a positive impact. Security has, and I really want to emphasize on the top. The security is part of peace, is what Chris mentioned, and I think that has a positive reflection as well as to how we live our lives, right? When we close our eyes and think about, the beautiful neighborhoods and all that and the people. I mean, there is security and there is peace, right? Why can't we expect the same? I think we haven't set the expectation at all, and that right now I think we are on that journey of setting the expectation of what peace should look like in cybersecurity. Now, talking as a practitioner, right? We've been working on the cyber insurance aspects and many other different angles, and I want to highlight what Durga just said about cyber war. I mean, that is so loosely defined, and business doesn't work that way. There has to be some very clear distinction as to how we transact in business, and this is public now. I probably can talk about it. Like, this whole concept of cyber war was enforced on the insurance policy with Zurich versus Mondelez, right? I mean, if that sets a precedent for how cyber insurance are going to get paid, and initially it was all good, and that claim was supposed to be paid, but all of a sudden it went to the courts, and think about our is our justice system prepared for this right now? We set a precedent that everybody has to go through. I mean, that whole risk management and mitigation instrument that we have in terms of insurance is gone. You cannot have $110 million insurance paid off, because that's what the cost was in that particular case. And I'm sure there is equivalent amounts or maybe more in other cases. If you think about Sony and think about all the other hacks that happen. And that is why I think it's very important to have a very clear definition. And we cannot have a clear definition until we set the expectations right. That's why I'm more of a learner in this. That's why I wanted to stay out of this panel. But I think it's good to be engaged, because this is where I think we bring our expectations as end users and consumers back to those that understand this, the sausage making very well. And Chris probably has done the most amount of work in this on the public side, on the public sector side, the government side. But this is where I think we have to make the difference. So I'll leave back my time to Chris. I really want to hear, and I'm here to learn. But I wanted to share my expectation of tangible concept of cyber peace that can come out of this discussion and the effort that are working right now.
No, it's very, very helpful, Val. You actually read my mind. My article that I'm working on later today is called War Games. And it actually deals with the active war exclusion and how that's playing out in the courts and how to find a more useful standard and what to do about it. So we're on the same page. We're going to have to connect more about that offline.
Yeah. Help us out. I mean, this is a call for help from the common man as in me and the business person. And that's what we are here to learn.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. No, this has been fantastic on a lot of levels already. Just in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we also get to a discussion of the how. How can we further, all the goals that we've laid out for ourselves here? So transitioning a little bit now, and this is kind of going to pick up on your suggestions and kind of the themes you alluded to, Chris, as well, about the need for a collective enforcement, et cetera. But, we seem to be in common agreement that although, the not having any cyber attacks for an hour, some form of negative cyber peace would be fantastic. Very, very unlikely. So rather, we're pivoting to the construction of this network of multi-level, some call it polycentric regimes that promote global, just, and sustainable cybersecurity by clarifying the rules of the road for companies and countries alike to help reduce the threat of cyber conflict, crime, and espionage to manageable levels. That could be compared to other business and national security risks, but that's easier said than done. So my question to all of you now is going to be, how do we build out this global culture of cybersecurity that's so foundational to this concept of cyber peace? And by doing so, help limit the risk, of cyber war. There's a lot of ideas, some of which you've already thrown out there, from updating, the Budapest Convention to establishing a network of cyber peace corps around the world, the way the Cyber Peace Foundation is in India, to a network of national cybersecurity safety boards. The Cyber Geneva Convention was brought up earlier, Rod. Heck, even a cyber Schengen Treaty has been brought up as different ideas in this context, right? So from your perspectives, I'm wondering what changes in policy, either building from the Global Commission report, Chris, or maybe the Cyber Solarium Commission at the organizational, national, international level, do you think are most important, most timely to really build momentum to this idea of cyber peace, right? And you can feel free to take that in lots of different directions. I know that's very easy to do because I laid a lot on the table there. But I'm wondering, Chris, maybe you could get us started there, and then we'll.
Yeah, sure. And just to key off the comment about the cyber imagery and what Hewlett has done, that's true. When I was in the State Department, I tried to make my office unique, so I had movie posters where hackers or computers were the main characters. And one of my favorites was a movie poster called Colossus: The Forbin Project. It was the first movie, 1970, where computers took over the world. The U.S. builds Colossus to control its nuclear arsenal. The Soviets steal the information and build Guardian and the Ural, so two talk to each other, take away all civil liberties, and take over the world. And so, very dystopian as most of these movies are. So we have to move away from this dystopian narrative. I actually close some talks I give with starting with that and ending with a picture of the actual Colossus at Bletchley Park, which is the first addressable programmable electronic computer in the world. Now, the Brits kept it secret till the 70s, so they lost any advantage they had from that. But it broke the Lorenz code, the high command code that was the code that was above the Enigma code that was used by Hitler in the high command. And so that Colossus, that computer, actually led to world peace. And so, technology can be your friend. It's not just the threats we have to look at; it's also the positive agenda. And when I talked about that Global Commission statement on what stability is, it's important to say that stability often means equilibrium, right? Mm-hmm. Equilibrium is not enough here. Equilibrium just means we have all the bad things and we're kind of keeping them in check, which we're not right now. Mm-hmm. And we have to have a positive agenda of what we're trying to achieve. And part of that is, as you say, very broad: human rights online, multi-stakeholder governance, stability in the sense that bad actors have an incentive not to act badly or a disincentive to act badly, that actors, including states, have a positive agenda to cooperate with each other, that's something they want to do when they get some benefit from that. That collective approach to cybersecurity is important. I think there are a couple challenges to that. One that we need to address. One of them is that it's not just states that are in this, right? States are major actors in terms of stability in cyberspace, to be sure, and we've seen lots of bad state activity, and we need to make sure we control that. And that's the rules of the road. That's deterrence and taking action. But private sector actors have a role too, not just the bad actors, cyber criminals, but the cyber industry, the manufacturers. Vulnerabilities are in products. We need to make sure we address that too. Everyone has a role in ensuring that this is peaceful, to harden the attack surface too. And some of what we did in the commission report is talk about that. We also need a dialogue that's not just states, but it really is a multi-stakeholder dialogue. And so that means civil society, that means the private sector, that means academia and government. And we haven't, that's been hit or miss. The UN negotiations, as good as they are, I think they're running into some rocky areas right now, are mostly states. You've included some other stakeholders, but it's mostly states. I think there are some opportunities. The French and Egyptians have made a proposal about a cyber action plan coming out of that. It's a little vague right now, but that can include other stakeholders, and that can be very positive. And the other thing I see, and I think is really important, is that not everyone's in the game. Not everyone, even country level, is in the game. There are some countries that are playing very heavily in this. But one of the things I've seen in the UN forum, and you talked about the Paris Peace Call, which I thought was a good awareness raising exercise. It really packaged up existing things. It didn't necessarily break the ground, but it was a very important awareness raising exercise. But lots of countries aren't dealing with this, and they don't have the capability to deal with this. They don't have structures in their governments to deal with cyber or cybersecurity. They don't have national strategies. They don't have the ability technically or the ability at a policy level. And so that, to me, really puts a laser focus on the importance of capacity building around the world and making sure that we're not just doing the kind of capacity building that's focused on like cyber crime and certs and things like that, but also the capacity building that's saying, here's how you have an institutional dialogue with other stakeholders. Here's how you deal with issues around norms and confidence building measures and international law, how you have cyber diplomats, that policy aspect. That's what the group, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise that I help run, has been doing for the last 5 years. And we're now an independent foundation. And we have 135 members, over 65 countries, but other stakeholders as well. We need to really step up that effort. And it goes back to the thing I said in the beginning. We need to treat this as a real national security priority, an economic priority, a diplomatic priority, human rights priority. We need to break it out from where it is now if we're going to achieve that aspirational goal of a more, not just a more secure environment, but one that will allow us to do even more than we are now. And I don't think we're ever going to stop all the attacks or the intrusions or the disruption on the internet, just like we have it in the physical world. People still break into things, people still steal things. That's going to happen till the end of time. Big deal. Let's make sure we keep the real excesses there and make sure that we can do all the positive things we want to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris. That's great. And we're going to return to you before the end here. And Durga, same question to you, sir. Any thoughts about the how, about changes in policy that need to happen at various levels to make cyber peace more achievable?
Yeah, I think the first step should be the spreading the awareness about cybersecurity across the globe, across all the stakeholders. I have learned from Rod without his knowledge. Like I have had your presentation in Davos, and I have quoted that many times in my presentations. And I have got my budget sanction, and I have spread my awareness very effectively. I would still quote that for your information. I always quoted his theory, like everything which is connected is hackable, and everything is going to get connected. And the third law is everything is going to be hackable. So those things I really massively spreaded that in my organizations and could create some kind of an awareness. The first thing I always felt that if the awareness is created, then most of the people will start understanding that why do need peace. Otherwise, they would think that we are trying to do something very different, which they don't understand. So for me, the first and foremost step to really create a cyber peace foundation is to create a cyber awareness culture in the globe, so that everybody understands the implication of cyber and the implication of if anything illegal or hacking happens, what could happen to them. That would really help us to get the momentum, and we can probably do so many other things like policy, like framework, like all this Geneva conclave or this Paris things. Also sort of things will really be fruitful if people are aware of these things. So that's my thought.
Thank you so much, Durga. That's a great perspective as well to bring to this. And Rod, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts along these lines as well. We talked earlier, for example, about the importance and difficulty of enforcement and verification. The idea of effective dispute settlement, graduated sanctions is really baked into the literature on how you sustainably manage human common pool resources generally. That's been really tough to import into the cyber context. So I'm wondering, how can we make our existing regimes around collective, cybersecurity work more effectively to help with enforcement?
Great. So first, Durga, thank you so much for your kind remarks. It makes me feel wonderful to hear Beckstrom's law spoken. Anything network can be hacked. Everything is being networked. So everything.
Right. Every time I followed that.
Yeah, it's like that's the baseline physics of the problem. And how do we solve this problem? Well, I like what Chris is doing is terrific. I mean, we need capacity building, we need education. And, I want to draw a parallel, Chris, which is when I ran ICANN, we had a wonderful program that had already existed called the ICANN Fellows Program. And what it really was is we were bringing in people from the telecom ministries around the world and government that wanted to get active in internet governance, did not understand the multi-stakeholder model because ICANN is majestic, but it's complex. Yeah. And so it's a 2-year program. And then they would be brought to all the 3 international meetings. And then the experts would be coming in and lecturing them on like, what's going to happen at the ICANN meeting? What's the role of the government advisory committee and what do they do? And what are the issues up? And so after 2 years, then these people understand, this is how ICANN works. This is what it is. And then they could go back to their governments or countries and really contribute actively to the policy making. So I like the ICANN, maybe we need some more fellows programs in cyber, and I'm not sure exactly, Chris, where they go and how they fit in, but you probably got that mapped out. But I think that's an important thing. Scott, you're coming back to your broad question on the collective perspective. My formal training is as an economist. I've been programming computers since I was 17. I love technology, but I'd like to think I'm a little bit like Elon Musk. He's an economist by training, but I'm an economist who loves technology. And so you talk about the tragedy of the commons. In some ways, the internet's like the tragedy of the commons. I mean, no one's taking care of it. Everyone's using it for what they want. Everyone loves the fact that it's open. The fact that it's open, I mean, I want to look at just really quickly, why did the internet win over there were many other networking models in the world. There was IBM Token Ring, there were star networks, there were many other networking models. The reason the internet won was economics. It's the lowest cost to packet switch and save and share that bandwidth through the network, number one. Number two, the decentralization reduced the administration costs and reduced the cost of entry into the platform. And then it quickly got the network effect, which has another, a beneficial effect. But so the internet, and the reason we're also attracted to it, is this incredible openness and flexibility. But that creates a commons because we're all there, and most people are good. And some are really bad. And so that open platform is going to be used by everyone. And so one of the things we got to think about is can we change, and we talk about this in cyber deterrence, how do you create an economic cost for your actions? And by the way, there's two books I could recommend for thinking about these problems that you're talking about, Scott, in the group. For me, from looking at a game theory standpoint, one of the book is Treasury's Wars. Okay, so sanctions are a way of implementing an economic cost on bad actors, including in cyberspace. Okay, but they're not universally available in all countries and all places. The U.S. is uniquely positioned because of the current reserve currency role of the U.S. dollar that we hope remains, but could be at risk someday. But the Treasury's Wars is a good book. The other one is Axelrod's masterpiece called The Evolution of Cooperation on game theory, and what it talks about, the key theme of the book is tit for tat, the game tit for tat, and how all there was a prize given for people to compete, and philosophers and mathematicians and computer programmers competed to see who could come up with the best algorithm in a 100-game series. So imagine I'm going to play against the other 4 players in the conference here. We have our own formulas, and we're going to react to our last game. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I said tit for tat, but it's actually the Prisoner's Dilemma is the framework. Prisoner's Dilemma. Out of all models in the world, what won Prisoner's Dilemma was starting with the golden rule. So starting with best behavior, okay, on your own part, and then tit for tat. And no model, I don't believe, has ever beat it. And so I think that we want to think about that in the cyber world. One way to get the cyber peace is, how do we educate more on the golden rule? Because if we think about it, clearly, we know other people want to be treated on the internet like we want to be treated. Okay, we don't want our information stolen. We don't want our homes invaded. I've got a little slider thing on my camera here so I can shut everybody off. I don't want to have to do that, but I mean, I'm happy to do that. But so the golden rule, and then tit for tat, how do you efficiently build a system that tends to lead to good behavior? Because the reality is human beings in general will begin to move to good behavior if the community's small enough. And the community's too broad, it won't, and that's where the tragedy of commons comes in. So I think I've never thought about this before, but I actually think we're in a bit of a tragedy of commons kind of situation with the lack of security in the internet and cybersecurity globally. So that's just kind of some quick riffs on some big picture thoughts.
I dig that. No, that was really, really helpful, Rob. And for what it's worth, shameless plug, Tragedy of the Cyber Commons features heavily in this other book that I wrote that came out earlier this year. It's a very hot topic. I wish we had more time to discuss it. Chris, though, I want to give you a final word here before we have to close on any other reflections that you'd like to add, including on this idea of how we build momentum, right? And one idea that's out there is the Paris Call for Trust and Security. Well, we saw something similar with the Paris Accord and climate change. A lot of national pledges, bilateral, regional pledges that help build momentum toward the Paris Accord. Could we see something similar in cyber? Would that be helpful?
I think it's a combination of things. I think that helped. It's a multi-stakeholder effort. I think the Commission helped. I think what's going on in the UN now helps. So we have to continue that momentum. I don't think any one document is the train to run everything on right now. I think we need to have a multiplicity of efforts. And what I'd say, just to kind of close this out, is, I think COVID, as bad as it's been, has given us a unique opportunity. And the reason I say that, there's a slight silver lining to all of this. which is it's become clear to countries around the world, even countries who did not prioritize this before, that digitization is a core priority for them, and the security is, because it can be attacked, right? As we see attacks on hospitals and others, that's become really in the top of the headlines and also policy development. So, you know, there's this old saying, don't waste a good crisis. I think there's opportunity here to say, look, this is really important. We need to work collectively around the world because of how important this is, and it's going to continue to be as we're all stuck at home, and we have to rely on these digital technologies. So let's use that, I think, to really advance a lot of the causes that are out there and to advance these discussions. And my last point to everyone is, look, if you're not involved in these discussions, there are opportunities to get involved. I mean, there are opportunities for countries, there are opportunities for private sector stakeholders. So the more that we do in that, the more engagement we have, the better and the stronger we'll be.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Chris. I couldn't agree more. And I know everybody listening in will join me in thanking our fantastic speakers again. Really, really appreciate all those wonderful remarks. And stay safe, everybody. Be well. For those in the U.S., don't forget to vote. Cyber peace. And Val, over to you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much. This has been a phenomenal learning experience, and always appreciate the collaboration and between the public and the private sector. And I think the how part that you kind of extracted out of this session is amazing. I think it's just got a lot of work to do now, and I look forward to doing with you. And I think we got to engage more, get the awareness going. We have to enforce the understanding and raise the bar of awareness. So thank you so much. This has been a great hour and fantastic having you all.
Bye-bye.
Have a good.
Thanks a lot.